Welcome to this lesson on Indian polity. Today, we're exploring one of the most crucial periods in our history, British rule in India from 1773 to 1947. During this 174-year period, a series of constitutional acts gradually shaped how India was governed. Understanding these laws is essential because many features of our modern constitution, our federal structure, our separation of powers, our civil service system, have their roots in this era. Let's trace this fascinating journey from the East India Company's control to India's independence. You might wonder, why study British colonial laws? The answer is simple yet profound. Our constitution didn't emerge from a blank slate. Instead, it evolved from and responded to the institutions created during British rule. The federal structure we have today, with powers divided between centre and states, was first proposed in the 1935 Act. The concept of separation of powers, where executive and legislative functions are distinct, originated from the Charter Act of 1853. Our prestigious civil service system, the IAS and IPS, traces back to the merit-based recruitment system introduced in 1853. Even our parliamentary procedures and judicial system were shaped by these British constitutional experiments. So understanding this history helps us appreciate how our constitution was not copied wholesale, but carefully adapted from this inherited framework. Let's establish a timeline to understand the progression. First phase, 1600 to 1773, traders. The British came to India as traders through the East India Company, which had an exclusive trading charter from Queen Elizabeth I. They established trading posts but had no political power. Second phase, 1773 to 1858, Company rule. This marks Company rule. Beginning with the Regulating Act of 1773, the company gradually transformed from traders into administrators and rulers. This 85-year period saw multiple constitutional reforms. Third phase, 1858 to 1947, Crown rule. After the revolt of 1857, the British Crown took direct control, establishing Crown rule. This final 89 years saw the gradual introduction of representative institutions and the march towards responsible government, culminating in independence on August 15, 1947. Each phase built upon the previous one, creating the constitutional framework we inherited. The Regulating Act of 1773 was a watershed moment, the first major step the British government took to control and regulate the company's affairs in India. This act was of great constitutional importance for three reasons. First, it recognized the company's political and administrative functions for the first time. Up until now, the company was purely commercial. This act made it an administrative body. Second, it created central administration in India. The Governor of Bengal became the Governor-General of Bengal with an executive council of 4 members to assist him. Lord Warren Hastings was the first Governor-General of Bengal. This was the beginning of centralized control. Third, it established the Supreme Court at Calcutta in 1774 with 1 Chief Justice and 3 judges, the first permanent court system in India. The Act also made the governors of Bombay and Madras subordinate to the Governor-General of Bengal, ending their earlier independence. Additionally, it prohibited company servants from engaging in private trade or accepting bribes, an early attempt at ethical governance. The Pitt's India Act of 1784 refined and improved upon the Regulating Act. The key innovation was the creation of a system called double government. Here's how it worked. The Court of Directors continued managing the commercial affairs of the company, ensuring profitability. But a new body called the Board of Control was created specifically to manage all political affairs, governance, revenue, military matters. This was significant because it clearly separated commercial interests from political governance. The Board of Control was empowered to supervise and direct all operations of civil and military government and revenues in the British possessions in India. Crucially, this act gave the British government supreme control over the company's administration. The British Parliament was no longer a passive observer, it now had direct authority. Additionally, for the first time, company territories in India were officially referred to as British possessions in India, a shift in rhetoric that reflected a shift in reality. The company now governed on behalf of Britain, not for commercial profit alone. The Charter Act of 1833 was transformative and marked the final step towards complete centralization under company rule. The Governor of Bengal was elevated to the status of Governor-General of India, no longer regional, but national in scope. Lord William Bentinck became the first Governor-General of India. This act granted the Governor-General exclusive legislative powers over the entire British India. Previously, different presidencies had some independent authority. Now, a single authority, the Governor-General, held all legislative power. This was unprecedented centralization. A subtle but important change, laws made under this act were now called acts instead of regulations, reflecting a shift from administrative rules to legislation. Interestingly, the act attempted to introduce open competition for civil service recruitment and stated that Indians should not be debarred from government positions. However, this progressive provision was fiercely opposed by the Court of Directors and never materialized. Most significantly, the Act ended the commercial activities of the East India Company. It became purely an administrative body, holding Indian territories in trust for the British Crown. The transition from trading company to administrative empire was complete. The Charter Act of 1853 was the last of the Charter Acts and truly significant for constitutional history. For the first time, this act separated the legislative and executive functions of the Governor-General's Council. Previously, the same body did both. Now, the Act added 6 new members called Legislative Councillors specifically to form a separate legislative wing. This legislative wing became what was known as the Governor-General's Legislative Council, and it functioned like a mini-parliament, following the same procedures as the British Parliament. This was the first time in India that legislation was treated as a special function requiring special machinery and special process. Crucially, the Act introduced local representation in the Central Legislative Council for the first time. 4 of the 6 new members would be nominated on the recommendation of provincial governments, Madras, Bombay, Bengal, and Agra. This was the beginning of representative institutions in India. The Act also reintroduced open competition for civil service recruitment, learning from the earlier failure of the 1833 Act. The Macaulay Committee was appointed in 1854 to oversee this system, and the covenanted civil service was thrown open to Indians, though few benefited initially. Though modest by today's standards, this act planted the seeds of representation and separation of powers that would later flourish. The Revolt of 1857, which Indians call the First War of Independence or the Sepoy Mutiny, was a watershed event. It shook the foundations of company rule and led directly to the Government of India Act of 1858. This act, formally titled the Act for the Good Government of India, abolished the East India Company entirely. The company's 157-year rule ended. All powers of government, territories, and revenues were transferred directly to the British Crown. The Governor-General was now elevated to the title of Viceroy of India, the direct representative of the British Crown. Lord Canning became the first Viceroy. The symbolic shift was profound. Not a merchant company, but the Crown itself now ruled India. The Act ended the double government system by abolishing both the Board of Control and the Court of Directors. In their place, it created a new office, the Secretary of State for India, a member of the British Cabinet who held complete authority over Indian administration and was answerable to the British Parliament. A 15-member Council of India was established to advise the Secretary of State, but it was merely advisory. Important to note, the Act reorganized control in Britain, creating a clearer administrative chain. But it did not substantially alter the system of government within India itself. That transformation came gradually through subsequent acts. The Revolt of 1857, which Indians call the First War of Independence or the Sepoy Mutiny, was a watershed event. It shook the foundations of company rule and led directly to the Government of India Act of 1858. This act, formally titled the Act for the Good Government of India, abolished the East India Company entirely. The company's 157-year rule ended. All powers of government, territories, and revenues were transferred directly to the British Crown. The Governor-General was now elevated to the title of Viceroy of India, the direct representative of the British Crown. Lord Canning became the first Viceroy. The symbolic shift was profound. Not a merchant company, but the Crown itself now ruled India. The Act ended the double government system by abolishing both the Board of Control and the Court of Directors. In their place, it created a new office, the Secretary of State for India, a member of the British Cabinet who held complete authority over Indian administration and was answerable to the British Parliament. A 15-member Council of India was established to advise the Secretary of State, but it was merely advisory. Important to note, the Act reorganized control in Britain, creating a clearer administrative chain. But it did not substantially alter the system of government within India itself. That transformation came gradually through subsequent acts. Let me elaborate on the Morley-Minto Reforms of 1909, named after Lord Morley, Secretary of State for India, and Lord Minto, Viceroy of India. This act substantially enlarged the legislative councils. The Central Legislative Council membership rose dramatically from just 16 to 60 members, nearly a fourfold increase. In many provinces, non-official members now outnumbered officials. The Act greatly expanded deliberative powers. Members could now ask supplementary questions, move resolutions on the budget, and engage in substantive debate, not merely rubber-stamp decisions. Most significantly, it associated Indians with executive power. For the first time, Indians were appointed to the viceroys and governors' executive councils. Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to join the Viceroy's Executive Council as law member. This was a historic breakthrough. However, this act is equally remembered for institutionalizing communal representation. Separate electorates were extended not just to Muslims, but to Sikhs, Christians, Anglo-Indians, and Europeans. This system would have lasting and divisive consequences for Indian politics. By 1917, the nationalist movement had grown too powerful to ignore. On August 20, 1917, the British government declared for the first time that its objective was the gradual introduction of responsible government in India. This led to the Government of India Act of 1919, named after Edwin Montagu, Secretary of State, and Lord Chelmsford, Viceroy. These are called the Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms. The Act separated central and provincial subjects, marking the beginning of a federal structure in India. Each level of government had its own domain, a revolutionary concept. At the provincial level, it introduced Dyarchy or double rule, a system where provincial subjects were divided into transferred and reserved. Transferred subjects were administered by ministers responsible to the provincial legislature. Reserved subjects remained under direct gubernatorial control. Though Dyarchy failed in practice, it embodied the principle of responsible government. The Act introduced direct elections to the legislatures for the first time in Indian history, a major democratizing step. It created a bicameral legislature at the center, an upper house, Council of State, and a lower house, Legislative Assembly, with most members chosen by direct election. It extended the franchise and granted voting rights based on property, tax, and education qualifications. It created a Public Service Commission in 1926 for recruiting civil servants, the predecessor to today's UPSC. Most importantly, it separated provincial budgets from the central budget, giving provinces financial autonomy. The Government of India Act of 1935 was the most detailed and comprehensive constitutional document of British rule. It contained 321 sections and 10 schedules, massive in scope. The Act proposed an all-India federation comprising British Indian provinces and princely states as units. It divided powers between the centre and provinces into three categories: Federal List, 59 items, for the centre, Provincial List, 54 items, for the provinces, and Concurrent List, 36 items, for both. This three-list system was revolutionary. Residuary powers were given to the Viceroy. Though the federation never came into being because princely states refused to join, this federal structure profoundly influenced the framers of our constitution. Our constitution's system of dividing powers is directly modelled on this 1935 Act. The Act abolished Dyarchy in the provinces and introduced provincial autonomy. Provinces could now function as autonomous administrative units with responsible governments. Governors had to act with the advice of ministers responsible to provincial legislatures. This system came into effect in 1937. The Act introduced bicameralism in 6 provinces: Bengal, Bombay, Madras, Bihar, Assam, and the United Provinces. It extended communal representation to include not just religious communities, but also depressed classes, scheduled castes, women, and labor. Institutionally, the Act created the Reserve Bank of India to control currency and credit, and established a federal court in 1937 as the highest judicial authority, the precursor to our Supreme Court. Many structural features of our 1950 Constitution, federalism, the three lists, public service commissions, were borrowed directly from this Act. The final act in this drama was the Indian Independence Act of 1947. On February 20, 1947, British Prime Minister Clement Attlee announced that British rule would end by June 30, 1948. This was followed by the acceptance of the Mountbatten Plan on June 3, 1947. The Indian Independence Act 1947 ended British rule in India and declared India to be an independent and sovereign state from August 15, 1947. The Act provided for the partition of India, creating two independent dominions, India and Pakistan, each with the right to secede from the British Commonwealth. It abolished the office of Viceroy. Instead, each dominion would have a Governor-General appointed by the British King on the advice of the Dominion's cabinet, initially ceremonial heads of state. Crucially, it empowered the constituent assemblies of both dominions to frame their own constitutions, a revolutionary provision. Indians would write their own constitutional rules. It proclaimed the lapse of British paramountcy over princely states, giving them the option to join India, Pakistan, or remain independent. Most acceded to India. At midnight on August 14, 1947, British rule ended. Lord Mountbatten became the first Governor-General of independent India. Jawaharlal Nehru was sworn in as the first Prime Minister. The 1946 Constituent Assembly became India's parliament and proceeded to draft our constitution. Now, let's connect history to the present. How did British constitutional acts shape India's 1950 constitution? First, our federal structure. The 1935 Act proposed federalism. Our constitution made it reality. The centre and states have defined spheres of authority, a direct inheritance. Second, the three-list system. Our constitution uses federal list, state list, and concurrent list, exactly as in 1935. This elegant system balances center-state relations. Third, separation of powers. The principle that legislature and executive should be distinct originated in the Charter Act of 1853. Our constitution fully embraces this. Fourth, bicameralism. Our parliament has Lok Sabha, lower house, and Rajya Sabha, upper house, just as proposed in the 1919 Act. Fifth, our civil service system. The IAS, IPS, and other services are based on merit-based recruitment introduced in 1853. The concept of a non-political, neutral bureaucracy comes from this era. Additionally, the Supreme Court traces its authority and structure to the Federal Court created in 1937. The Constituent Assembly didn't invent these institutions, it adapted and improved them, making them truly democratic. Let's conclude by reflecting on what this history means. We inherited a framework. Our Constitution wasn't created in a vacuum. It evolved from 174 years of British constitutional experiments, centralization, representation, federalism, separation of powers, responsible government. Each act built on the previous one, creating an institutional foundation. But we transformed it. Where the 1935 Act proposed federation for imperial control, our constitution uses federalism for democratic governance. Where the 1919 Act limited voting rights to property owners, we granted universal adult suffrage, one person, one vote. Where British acts maintained hierarchies, our constitution proclaims liberty, equality, fraternity. We made it democratic. We added fundamental rights and duties. We made the executive directly accountable to the legislature. We enshrined the principle of judicial review. We reserved seats for historically marginalized communities. We made it secular. We rejected the communal electorate system that had divided India. We guaranteed freedom of religion and equal citizenship regardless of faith. We made it egalitarian. We abolished the old class distinctions. We promised social and economic justice. So the lesson is this: understanding our colonial past is not about celebrating it. It's about understanding how we transformed inherited structures into instruments of people's sovereignty. Our constitution is not borrowed, it is adapted and reinvented.